Hello, everyone, and welcome to Your Mind, Your Reality, Your Results, a weekly live show where I speak with an expert in the subject of mindset so you can change your mindset and ultimately get the amazing results that you want in your life. I'm so glad to be introducing Dinalynn to the show today. Welcome.
Thank you. So nice to be here, Leah. Thank you
Excellent. Well,
very
you
much.
guys are in for a treat to be listening to us today, and Dinalynn has some great expertise to share with us. If we haven't met before, my name's Leah Fink. I'm the owner and founder of All Thrive, and I help protect people from the pain of damaged relationships. So if you ever want to chat about that, I would love to connect. But we have some special expertise here today, and I want to encourage you all to please join into the conversation. Feel free to put your questions and comments in there, even if you're not watching this live. If you put your questions and comments in, we can make sure to get back to you after the fact because we'll still be there. I also want to encourage people. We are talking a little bit more about families and parenting today, but the stuff that we're talking about is really applicable across the board. If you have young people in your life, if you're a mentor or even a supervisor and you have people below you, this is really great applicable knowledge for everyone. So I really hope you guys enjoy it. Now, to start out, I love to, introduce people and can you let the audience know how you became a parenting coach, how you became an expert here?
Thank you, Leah. Yes, I have worked in the schools. At first, I want to say that preventing from the pain of damaged relationships, I love that phrase. And that is so true with parents and children too, because when we understand those children, then we can protect that damage or that relationship from the damage, just like you're talking about. So it absolutely is a good fit. So I worked in the schools as a speech language pathologist for 26 years, and I worked with children that had communication disorders. Along the way through that, I got a certified in teaching English as a foreign language. So I work with families of bilingual homes and people that are internationals coming to this country wanting to learn the language. And so whether it's from a second language perspective or from a disability perspective, I always came up to parents that had the same questions. Why won't my kids listen? And they would be frustrated with what is it that we're doing wrong? Why is it that I'm not communicating with them? Or what are they doing? I thought they were good kids. And then that sense of blame. And so I think that what I really always want to tell parents right from the get-go is that we need to understand how their brain is developing. And so children's brains, if I can just get right into it here.
Please jump in.
Okay, so like children's brains are certainly not developed the way adult brains are developed. And the children, um, they only have a certain amount of knowledge and life experience at the time that parents say something to them. And so when they're missing some of that life experience, they're not going to understand the words the same way that we do because we have had a lifetime of experience that causes us to understand words differently. And so I always want to propose to parents right up the front is maybe your kid isn't trying to disobey. Maybe your child is not listening. Maybe your child is just having a snafu in their understanding of the language that you're using because they've got this much experience with those words, or they've got that much experience with putting those words together in a sentence in that fashion. And so then they can easily mix that up. And I just got in a conversation with somebody about this brain development thing just last week, I think it was. And he said to me, I tell my kids to put away their toys. And he himself has a bilingual home. And so we started talking about put away. And let's just think about that for a minute from a child's perspective. Yesterday, we said, put away the fork, and it meant in the slot in the drawer. Put away your shoes meant in the entryway, but put away your socks meant in the dresser drawer. And when they've got toys on the floor, put away means that we think they know Legos go with Legos and doll clothes go with doll clothes, and then those containers go on the shelf or whatever it is. So put away, whether we're talking multi-language, we're talking a language disability, or we're simply talking development. Understanding the language can be really key. So that's kind of the starting block of understanding some of that whole idea of brain development, we generalize. Do you know the word generalize, Leah?
Yep.
Okay, so maybe you use it this way, but
Yep.
generalizing in language would be, if I use a phrase in this environment, can I also use the same phrase in another environment and understand what it means in that environment and the next environment and the next environment, because I've got enough prior knowledge to take it along with me and be able to apply it. Generalizing is a term that we use in speech pathology and in teaching and all of that quite often. Children don't know how to generalize. They just don't. They need to have enough life experience to be able to build up an arsenal of experiences to have an ability to generalize. So that is a big area where the brain development really impacts.
Well,
So,
I mean, I completely agree with you. We're going to go some more into language today because it is so critical. A lot of the miscommunications, even as adults, come from people thinking that you understood something the exact way I did when I said it to you.
yeah.
And I think childhood is such an interesting piece with this as well, because kids' brain waves when they're young kids are different than ours. So on top of not having this experience, their brain literally processes things different. So it's so easy to take things on as they're not intended. This leads, of course, to our adulthood trauma and experiences that we're trying to figure out. And then, I worked a lot more with youth and teenagers, and their prefrontal cortex hasn't developed. So
Yes.
it's not just then the words that you say, but it's actually the impact of those words, the consequence, the outcome. They can't think about that the same way we say. Oh yeah, watch out about your future. They don't comprehend it the same way that we do.
Doesn't mean
They know that
anything.
if they make X decision, they might end up with Y consequence, and they don't. So I love that you're starting with that piece.
Yeah. And that leads us too into the idea of sentence length and word choice. Of course, I'm focusing on some younger children, but it means the same thing, like with older children too. And it means the same thing when you're talking to a spouse. Sometimes, like maybe one spouse is verbose and eventually somebody just tunes out. I can't take any more words. And sometimes it is word choice. And, like we might use a word that they don't know, whether we're talking children or we were talking, like if I asked you about generalizing, because I know in my field it's jargon, but I don't know if it's jargon for you or not. I think of it as a normal word, but sometimes we use words that are our own words. And then there's idioms, and there's so much figurative language that we use too, that we can lose our kids or our spouse or whomever that we're speaking to along the way.
Yeah. Well, when we first met, I talked a little bit about personality types.
Yeah.
And that's work I do with a lot of people. And even just the fact that different personalities value different words and want to hear those different words to see them as more or less important. Like you might notice that I say I think a lot because that's part of the way my brain processes. Where if I'm meeting a feeling person and I'm just talking about I think, they're going to go, oh, I'm not connected to this. I don't understand what you're saying, even though if I said I feel for the exact same sentence otherwise, like you talked about that generalizing, they would go, oh, now I get it. So yeah, language it's so fascinating because it's simple but complex at the same time.
Yes, and it can also drive the personality of the culture. So if you look at an Italian language, and I was in Italy when I was in college, and I remember the vibrancy of the language reflected almost like a personality that moved about the country, and so you can see things like that too. As parents, so going along, so I'm sure that we don't get too lost in the fun conversation of language, but when I think about what it is that I would like parents to focus on, now that you think about the language development or the brain development, and then how language develops somewhat in there. I didn't say much about that. There's a lot to be said about that. And we started that conversation and it could be hours. But if we could see, hear, and sense what your child actually understands from what it is that you say, we will understand why it is that they behave the way they behave much better. Because what they actually understand gets back to that idea of brain development. They're not going to actually understand if they haven't had enough life experience to go with it. And we, as adults, and anybody, as we talked about, we tend to think that people think like us. We tend to think that when I say something, you know what I mean. But there is that huge connotation piece. So yeah, that's another thing, to learn the language that will help your children understand is huge. And if we can get a good grasp on that, we know then that we're not to only think this is behavior. It might be, certainly it might be, but that's not the place, I think, to begin many times. And then another thing, like we're talking about leadership, effective leadership in the home. I think I didn't even introduce that. And that's what we were going to talk about today, is effective leadership in the home. So the first part, of course, is that understanding the brain, and then understanding what they're understanding, to be able to see through their eyes.
Yep.
But another thing is to be the first one to make a repair. We're gonna have mistakes in our communication. We're going to have problems with it. That is part of it. Whether we're a married couple, or we're parent-child, or we're best friends. But to be able to go to your child to say, I'm sorry, I did not understand what you meant, teaches them how to come back to you to say, I didn't understand what you meant. If you say, can you say that again? I didn't catch it. That teaches your child to say, oh, I need a repeat. If you say it, they get it. And so there's this unintended way that parents so often say, I told you so. I told you to do that. And I see that in my programming so often, that the children just kind of look and they wait. They didn't even know they were given instruction. So, yeah, well, I bet you see that too in your.
Totally. Well, and I particularly love that you're talking about that piece of repair to relationship. So I do a lot of work with helping people understand how power dynamic affects relationship. And it's one of those subtle things that we don't maybe always think about. But once you start learning about, you recognize how real it is all the time. And so obviously there's a dynamic between a parent and a kid, right? The parent has a lot of power, especially when kids are really young. And that's not a bad thing. It's a great thing. But part of what I teach is around, with great power comes great responsibility. What is that responsibility? And the responsibility, I believe, of that person, in this case, the parent with more power, is to be accountable for the health of the relationship. So it doesn't mean that if your kid comes in and swears at you, that's still something they're choosing to do. And how you show up is still totally on you. But that piece of being the first to repair the relationship, the one who's doing more effort or taking that extra step to go, how does my teen need this communicated versus how I would just naturally and easily communicate, like the stuff we talked about with language, that should be the responsibility of the parent. And it's hard. We're often unaware of that power piece when we're the ones with more power. It's so much easier to say, oh, this person is just not doing what I want. Have the power, they should listen to me. And then, like you said, you get this piece about like, oh, bad behavior, and they should apologize to me. So I just love that you mentioned that piece.
Yeah. And that gets right to the next thing that I was thinking about, is that concept of teaching the right skills. So we're teaching the skill of repair, and we're doing it by repairing. We all know that we're teaching by example, and we hear that all the time. But the example that we give fairly often isn't what we think we're teaching. So, for example, if I say to you, I want to go to the store, and you are a child, and I think that means put on your shoes and your coat and get in the car.
Yep.
I don't always teach that until I say, put on your shoes and put on your coat and get in the car. Yep. And then the child says, oh, okay. And sometimes they do part, sometimes they do one, sometimes they do none. Sometimes they think I have to go to the bathroom, but they don't speak it. They just leave and go to the bathroom. Yep. So there's so many pieces of that. So when we teach the skills of repair and teaching the skills of communicating, to be able to be clear and to bring those skills to the level that we know that our children already know.
Yep.
And that's very, very important, just like you were saying. And then that side-by-side teaching, to do things beside them. And then there's a repetition in teaching skills. This is another thing that I see as a real catch for parents a lot of times, is that I told them to, and parents think that they taught them. Or I said it twice. I did it last week and I did it this week. We've been doing it every day. If the children aren't doing it when you're saying it, they don't understand something. It might be part understood, but there's some piece in there that you're teaching them. And when, for example, if you're thinking, get in the car, we're going to leave, but you don't say now, children don't catch that means now. They miss the littlest things that we think they don't catch, or that we think that they would catch, and they don't catch it. Mm-hmm.
Well, and when I think about that, something I'm thinking about too is, when you're in this place and you're giving an instruction, really the kid only has two options, and they have the option, if they understand it, to agree with it and go along with it, or to disagree with it and not go along with it. Mm-hmm. And what happens when you can create this understanding that you're talking about, this communication and making sure they actually understand it, you're more likely to also get that agreement, because they're going, okay, now I understand what mom's saying. I can agree and I'm going to go along with it. And the really dangerous place that I think, unfortunately, a lot of parents get in is when you're not taking that accountability and you just start, maybe now you're yelling at your kids, which no one wants to do. It's a reality.
It happens.
It's going to happen.
Yeah.
But when you start doing that, you start giving them this message that they have to go along with things, even if they don't agree, because they don't even understand what's happening.
Right.
And then you get this like false harmony. And this happens on all levels. This is a parenting thing. This is a boss thing. This is and it becomes this place where they'll now disagree with you because they don't get it, but they'll obey you. And then you think everything's good. You're like, here's my well-behaved kid. They must be so happy. They must be. And meanwhile, this kid's sitting here like, man, I don't like this. And especially as they become teenagers, as they become adults.
Yeah.
Now what's sitting in a relationship?
Mm-hmm. We don't want our kids to be compliant out of fear.
Exactly.
Yeah. Sometimes kids will be compliant because they're afraid of, oh, if I need to do this or I'm going to get yelled at. So they do the piece that they understand, but it's still going to only be the piece they understand. Totally. And as your expectation grows and they haven't caught on to that there's a new expectation, they won't necessarily meet it. Mm-hmm.
And then we keep blaming them and saying that they're bad for disobeying.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they keep
that does
getting
happen.
that message
But,
that just reinforces.
In spite of all of that, I rarely ever meet parents that just think that their kids are bad. I can't say I've met any that just say their kids are bad. They know that their hearts are good. They know that the kids want to do well. They know that they want to communicate well. They know they want their hearts to be connected. But then there's this miss of, how do I do it when I get so angry because my child is still doing whatever, they're still playing in the sink and it's time to go to bed, or all the things. If you're a parent, then you or know a child, you know that this is the case. And heck, even if you've owned a puppy, this is the case. Right? So we don't want to believe our children are ill-behaved, intentionally badly behaved. I don't meet parents that want that. The parents that I meet are ones that want to improve their communication skills. And that's why it is that they contact me. That's why it is that they say, oh, can you help me with this? And I'm like, yeah, because, I love to be able to shine a light on what it is that they're saying. So if for example, now I'm kind of circling back to that word sentence length. If a child is 5 years old, the average sentence length of output, that would be like a child speaking, is 5. Not that that's the maximum sentence length, that's their average sentence length. So sometimes they say, yeah, and there's a 1. And sometimes they'll give you a longer 10-word sentence, but their averages are 5 if they're 5, 4 if they're 4, 3 if they're 3. So it's real easy to remember those things. So let's say I have little Johnny that he's 5 years old and he's learning 2 languages. So dad or mom says, hey, Johnny, wash your hands and come to the table for dinner. And we think, wash your hands and come to the table for dinner. Now, he might be able to do that because it's a repeated pattern. It's a routine, and he's got all of the visuals around him and the smells around him to help him comprehend what the situation is. But if you take that child and put him into a different environment where he doesn't have the visual cues and he doesn't have the smelling cues, that wouldn't be a sentence that he would necessarily be able to understand. And we forget that there's many things that we communicate with, which is our body, which is our home, which is the other things that are going on around us. My computer just said low battery. I'm not sure what's going on. We're plugged in. So, okay. So yeah, I think that learning the length of sentence that a child, your child, can deal with, and learning which words that they already know and working with those words is I guess that's where I come in as a speech therapist. That's what I would do. I would be able to tell what the kid knows, what it is that they're able to do, write a treatment plan, execute the treatment plan, so we give treatment, write progress reports, and teach the parents how to do their homework at home. So yeah, that's one of the things that I do with parents. And that really, really is helpful to know that. Another thing that I've seen, sometimes parents think like there's some words that are like too hard for their kids. And I'm going to say that's not true. It's how big of a sentence are you putting that one word with? And do they conceptually have the information? So if I say, like, I'm giving you guys nuggets of information, nugget might not be a word that the child knows. And somebody thinks, he's 5, he's not going to know nugget. But if you use the word nugget over and over, they're going to know it. Most words are like that. Unless they're conceptual words. Most words are like that. Like, words aren't out of bounds. Words are all good. I went to college in England, for another place there, and I had a professor who decided that he was going to teach his 5 and 8-year-old a new word every day while we were on program. And he taught those kids, and those kids used vocabulary that we didn't know. And they used it correctly because it was in the home. And it was like the first indication I realized that, yeah, there's no way or no indication that children can't learn any word.
Yeah. So and there's that difference between like your working memory, what you have to memorize 6 words in a row versus one word in this contextual piece, which I find it so interesting. And I was even sitting here as you were talking, and like your average sentence has 20 words.
Right.
Which means that when parents or anyone isn't being aware of what the other person might be needing in terms of shorter sentences, maybe more direct language, less direct language, as any sort of leader, when we're not doing that, if that's your natural state of being, they're just hit with it. They've got to deal with it, whatever it is. Right. And this idea of a 5-word sentence to really make sure your kid understands you so they can do what you're asking of them, when our average is, let's say, 20 words, that's huge. That's really impactful.
I am going to correct that. So that 1 through 5 works until you're 5. Beyond that doesn't work. And then we don't actually I don't have 50-word sentences as my average. and most adults kind of get around 12. But still, the principle is the same. And you're absolutely right in the principle.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking more for adults that when you as a leader can't be aware of this need that your other person might have, that they might have different language, that they might have a different style of communication they prefer. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I don't think 50-year-olds use 50 sentences or 50-word sentences. That's a good point. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yes. And the idea of your home, to be a leader in your home, is really, you have the responsibility, as Leah was saying too, to connect with that child. And it's your job to try to figure out, well, what do they know and how do I make my sentences so that they get it? How do I change me so that they become empowered? And the other thing is, how do I teach skills? Like, really teach skills. So like, this other stuff helps us for the child to be belonging and acceptance and love and all those good feelings that we know that we need. Yeah. When we teach skills, we're teaching our children competency. We're teaching them confidence. And I think in good leadership, we as parents will give our kids lots and lots of skills to think of your parenting as I am leading this child into adulthood, and I want this child to be so competent that they are able to do all their problem solving by the time they're whatever age.
Yeah.
So I actually encourage the parents that I work with to kind of create a roadmap. Where do you want your child to be? At what age? For me, when I was raising my children, I figured that they needed to have all of their life skills known by the time they drive a car. Because I knew that for me, when I started driving a car, all domestic skills were out the window. I didn't have time. I was out doing whatever. So when I raised my kids, I thought, okay, so they're going to be able to cook and feed themselves and buy groceries in the largest capacity I knew how to teach. They were going to have power tools and everything in my garage that I know how to teach. They were going to be able to put air in the car tires and change oil, because I only know a few things about cars. But what I could teach, I would teach them. There were things about camping and all that, because I love being outdoors. I could teach them a lot about that. But I can't teach a lot about electrical or plumbing. But I can teach them something about woodworking. So that's a strength. If we as parents, as leaders, we think about what strength we bring to the table, that's what it is that we give to our children. And give them as much as you have to offer in that deliberate side-by-side teaching and setting a roadmap. And then sometimes parents don't really know how to whittle that away to be able to figure out, okay, where do I start when they're 3 if I want them to cook? and then we talk about, well, that means we're going to be scooping and pouring, and it means that they're going to cut with a butter knife. So there are so many stepping stones along the way that we need, but we don't want to wait until our kids are 12 or 16 and say, oh, go feed yourself. It doesn't work.
No, I love this. And when we first met, this is one of the first things I heard you speak about, which was fantastic. I use the word mastery for this. Mm-hmm. And there's a great book called Reclaiming Youth at Risk, talking about the circle of courage. I think all parents should look it up. It's phenomenal. But this idea of people, and especially youth, having these core needs. And like you talked about belonging, that's the base. They need that sense of being cared about and people understanding them. But then mastery being so critical, this sense that I can have an effect in the world, that when I go out, it's if you tell your kid, no, mommy's cooking, you can't do anything. They're just getting the message, I can't do it. There's your simple sentence. I can't do anything. Your 4-year-old.
That's also
understands.
And it's also where you're teaching what you don't intend to teach.
Exactly.
And that gets back to that whole brain development thing. And our leadership as a parent. Did we teach what we intended to teach? Do we understand how they're looking at the world? And if we can get behind their eyes and we change how we say it, such as, today I don't want your help in the kitchen because I'm stressed, but tomorrow you can help me in the kitchen, whatever it is, Yeah, that's a fantastic thing to bring up.
Yeah. So I feel there's so many opportunities for parents, for anyone, to create an opportunity for other people to feel mastery, to achieve something at the level that's appropriate for them. You're not getting your 3-year-old to bake a flan by themselves, right? Like whatever it is, but that you're giving them this opportunity to succeed and therefore like have the experience and really deeply feel I can succeed. So now when they're 16 and they get to that bigger challenge in their life, they have the skills. And you have great examples of this, which I absolutely love. And the one thing I want to acknowledge maybe for parents, which can be challenging, or for anyone when you're giving the sense of mastery, is it might involve things being a little bit messier or not quite as easy as if you just do them.
It takes more time.
You can pour better than a 3-year-old.
Right. It takes time, but that is leadership too, isn't it? Yeah. We take the time. We take the time to empower the next person to be able to be competent, capable, and confident doing it by themselves. That is the leadership. But in order to be able to do that, we really need to understand, how is it that we touch their heart? How is it that they can feel that sense of belonging? How is it that they have the acceptance? And how is it that we're actually communicating with them? Yeah.
Oh my God, our time has flown so quickly.
That was fast.
I really hate to bring it in, but we are at time. How can people contact you if they want to learn a little bit more about what you do?
email me. I would be glad to get an email. DinalynR@gmail.com. You can see it in the show notes, I believe. Is that right?
Yeah,
so
in the description.
The spelling will be in the description. DinalynR@gmail.com. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I cannot encourage you enough. If you would like to be a better parent, know some more about this, reach out to Dinalynn. You will not regret it. She's just fantastic. I've been waiting to have you on the show, so I'm so excited that everyone got to hear this. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Leah. It's a delight to come be with you and be on your show. And every time that we've talked, it's been wonderful. Thank you.
I agree. And thank you all so much for listening. Have a great week. And remember, every thought counts.
I love it.